named Massey, and I said, go your own way. And once I left her, she resigned because she would never have survived a primary. But I think she's a nice person. Okay, thank you.
President Trump, his biggest moment since the inauguration, to tell Americans what he wants to do as president and possibly to turn around impressions after a bumpy beginning.
Congress just did something that has Donald Trump absolutely losing his mind, and what happened on Capitol Hill could destroy his entire strongman foreign policy agenda. Lawmakers just introduced legislation specifically designed to physically block Trump from invading Greenland or starting full-scale war with Venezuela without getting their permission first. Not expressing concern, not writing letters, actually writing laws that would make it illegal for Trump to launch these military operations on his own. And this isn't just Democrats doing this. Republicans are co-sponsoring these bills. Members of Trump's own party looking at his threats to invade Allied territory and saying we need to stop this before it happens. Senate just held vote on whether Trump should be required to get congressional approval before escalating Venezuela military action. Vote came down to tie, 50-50, close as it gets. J.D. Vance had to break tie to save Trump. That's how divided Congress is over whether president should have unlimited war powers. And 3 Republicans voted against Trump. 3 members of his own party saying, no, we can't give him blank check to start wars without our approval. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, please subscribe, because you might think you are, but aren't. Your subscription actually matters here. That's why we built John Brown Show, to bring you real stories, real context. All right, let's get into what actually happened, because this represents massive constitutional showdown over who controls American military. Senate voted on resolution that would have required Trump to terminate military operations against Venezuela unless Congress explicitly authorized them. That's not suggestion, that's directive. Congress trying to order president to stop military action entirely unless he comes to Capitol Hill and makes his case for why it's necessary. Share this video with everyone you know, because language and resolution was crystal clear. Directed president to end use of armed forces in hostilities against Venezuela without congressional approval. Think about what that means. Lawmakers weren't asking Trump to consult with them, weren't requesting updates, were trying to order him to stop unless they gave green light. That's Congress trying to take back war powers that Constitution actually gives them, not the president. Backers of resolution argued this was about reasserting constitutional authority. Framers deliberately gave war power to Congress, not executive branch, because they wanted decisions about sending Americans into combat to be made collectively by representatives of people, not by single individual who might have personal agenda or vendetta. That's basic separation of powers. That's how system is supposed to work. But Trump's been escalating involvement in Venezuela for weeks without any congressional input. Aggressive military action, threats against Venezuelan government, operations that international law experts say cross serious lines, reports of attempts to dictate who can sell Venezuelan oil, suggestions about kidnapping foreign leaders. This isn't normal diplomatic pressure. This is fundamental shift in how America engages with other nations, all happening without Congress having any formal say. And then there's Greenland situation, which is somehow even more insane. While Senate was voting on Venezuela resolution, House members were unveiling brand new legislation specifically designed to prevent Trump from invading Greenland. Let that sink in. Members of Congress felt it necessary to introduce a bill that explicitly bans President of United States from invading Greenland. We're living in times when that sentence is actual political reality, not satire. This legislation is direct response to Trump's repeated threats to annex Greenland and his suggestions he might use military force to take control of Danish territory. Bill being led by representatives including Republican Don Bacon and Democrats. Bipartisan effort. That's significant because it shows genuine concern across party lines. When Republicans and Democrats come together to co-sponsor legislation restricting Republican presidents' military authority, that tells you something important. This isn't partisan politics. This is lawmakers from both parties looking at what Trump's saying and concluding they need legal guardrails before something catastrophic happens. fact that Republican like Don Bacon willing to put his name on this shows Trump's Greenland rhetoric has crossed line even for members of his own party. When your own people are sponsoring bills to stop you from invading allied nations, you've lost control of situation. And legislation would bar Trump from invading NATO country or territory like Greenland without congressional approval. Language specifically mentions Greenland because Trump's been openly floating idea of taking it by force if Denmark refuses to sell. He's repeatedly said he wants United States to control Greenland, refused to rule out military action, suggested territorial expansion is part of making America great again. For lawmakers who take constitutional responsibilities seriously, this is terrifying. Idea that American president might invade territory of one of our closest allies, fellow NATO member, without even consulting Congress is almost unthinkable. Yet here we are, having to write laws to prevent exactly that scenario. That's how far outside normal bounds Trump has gone, that his own party feels need to legislatively restrain him from starting wars. Think about what this represents. Congress isn't just expressing concern anymore. They're drafting concrete legal barriers to Trump's ability to launch military operations. These aren't vague resolutions or non-binding statements. These are actual bills with teeth. Language specifically prohibits president from taking certain actions. Greenland bill doesn't say Trump should consult Congress before invading. Says he cannot invade without authorization, period. That's hard legal line. Make sure you're subscribed because if Trump crosses that line, he'd be violating federal law, creates potential grounds for impeachment, criminal charges, at minimum massive constitutional confrontation. Stakes couldn't be higher for both president and Congress as institution. This is fundamental battle over separation of powers, over whether Constitution still means anything, over whether president can just do whatever he wants militarily or whether Congress has role. And Trump is absolutely furious about this. Of course he is. His entire foreign policy approach depends on being able to act unilaterally, on making threats and following through without anyone stopping him, on projecting strength through aggressive military posturing. These congressional bills directly threaten that entire strategy. They tell Trump you don't have unlimited authority. You have to work within constitutional framework. You have to get approval from elected representatives before starting wars. What makes this even more significant is timing. These bills aren't coming months or years after Trump first started talking about Greenland and Venezuela. They're being introduced right now in real time as Trump continues making increasingly aggressive statements. Lawmakers trying to get ahead of crisis instead of reacting after fact. They learned from past experiences that once military action begins, it becomes politically harder to stop. Once American forces committed, once flag raised, once any conflict starts, dynamics change completely. Congress trying to establish clear legal boundaries now, before Trump can present them with situation where troops already deployed and backing down, would look like abandoning them. That's smart strategic thinking from legislative branch. Think about broader context here. This is happening while Trump faces impeachment resolution accusing him of high crimes and misdemeanors, while he's fighting over Epstein files, while he's dealing with judicial rulings against him, while his own cabinet members like Kristi Noem might be distancing themselves. Trump facing pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. And now Congress adding another front by trying to limit his war powers. Every time Trump threatens to invade allied nation without authorization, every time he suggests he can ignore international law, every time he acts like normal checks and balances don't apply, he gives opponents more evidence for abuse of power claims. These war powers bills connect to larger pattern people are seeing. President who wants no checks at all, who wants power to make war and peace decisions without Congress, who wants control over Justice Department without oversight, who wants to investigate enemies while blocking investigations into himself. Make sure you're subscribed to John Brown Show because critics are framing this as imperial presidency. President who's overseen operations that raise serious questions. President who openly floats invasions of allied territory. President who threatens to take NATO countries by force without seeking vote from people's representatives. When you put all that together, paints picture of executive power run amok. Of leader who doesn't believe constitutional limits apply to him, and international implications are massive. America's allies watching this closely. If United States can threaten to invade Greenland, which belongs to Denmark, NATO ally, what does that say about American commitments? Why should any country trust American security guarantees if President can simply decide to take allied territory by force? Damage to America's credibility could be profound and long-lasting. Share this with everyone because these aren't just domestic constitutional questions. They're about whether America will continue being a reliable partner in international system or whether it becomes an unpredictable actor that other nations need to guard against. That's why story matters so much right now. Congress drawing line, telling Trump you can go this far and no further. Question now is whether Trump will respect that line or try to cross it anyway. If he crosses it, we move into uncharted constitutional territory. If these bills pass and Trump violates them, what happens next? Does Congress impeach him again? Do courts get involved? Does military follow orders that might be illegal? These aren't hypothetical questions anymore. These are real scenarios people in government actively preparing for. Think about what happens if Trump decides to ignore congressional restrictions, if he orders military action in Venezuela despite resolution, if he moves on Greenland despite legislation prohibiting it. That creates constitutional crisis of enormous proportions, because then Congress has to decide whether to enforce their own laws, whether to impeach president for violating war powers restrictions, whether to use power of purse to defund operations. All options create massive political upheaval. Make sure you're subscribed and there's military angle too. What do commanders do if president orders action that Congress has explicitly prohibited? Do they follow orders from commander-in-chief? Do they respect congressional authority? Do they resign rather than participate in potentially illegal operation? These are impossible positions for military leaders to be in, but that's where Trump's approach is heading, towards situations where people have to choose between obeying president and respecting constitutional process. The fact that vote on Venezuela resolution was 50-50 shows how divided government is over this. Half of Senate willing to restrict Trump's war powers, half defending presidential authority, and 3 Republicans breaking ranks to vote with Democrats. That significant fracture in GOP unity shows that even within his own party, concerns exist about where Trump's taking military policy. Share this video with everyone you know because those 3 Republican senators who voted to restrict Trump, they're taking real political risk. Trump still commands fierce loyalty from huge portion of GOP base. Republican members who cross him often face primary challenges from Trump-endorsed candidates, get attacked on social media, face pressure from constituents who see Trump as leader of conservative movement. Yet even with all those political risks, these Republicans stepped forward to vote against unlimited war powers. That's a sign of how serious situation has become. These lawmakers willing to risk Trump's wrath because they believe constitutional stakes too high to stay silent. That should tell you something about gravity of what's happening. When politicians willing to sacrifice their own political futures to stand up for principle, issue is real. Think about what comes next. Trump's obviously going to fight these bills with everything he has. We'll call them unconstitutional restrictions on presidential authority. We'll argue commander-in-chief has inherent power to protect American interests. We'll claim lawmakers are tying his hands and making America look weak. That's predictable response. That's what he does when anyone tries to check his power. But Congress has Constitution on their side. War powers belong to legislative branch. That's not interpretation. That's explicit in founding document. Framers gave Congress power to declare war because they didn't want single executive making those decisions alone. They understood danger of concentrated military authority. They built systems specifically to prevent it. What we're watching is that system being tested like never before. President who believes in strongman tactics, who admires leaders like Putin, who thinks America should expand territory through force if necessary. Facing off against lawmakers who say no, that's not how democracy works. Constitution has rules and we're going to enforce them. This is a defining moment for American democracy. Either Congress successfully reasserts its constitutional role in matters of war or it fails, and presidential power becomes effectively unchecked in military realm. Future historians will look back at this as turning point one way or other. Either separation of powers survived Trump's presidency or it didn't. And stakes extend beyond just these specific situations. If Congress successfully restricts Trump's authority on Greenland and Venezuela, sets precedent that limits executive power for future presidents too, establishes that war powers restrictions have teeth, that Congress won't just roll over when president wants to start military operations. Conversely, if Trump finds way to circumvent these restrictions, or if bills fail to pass, establishes that modern presidents have essentially unlimited war powers regardless of what Constitution says. That would be massive shift in American governance, would fundamentally alter balance of power between branches, would give every future president blueprint for ignoring congressional authority on military matters. Bottom line is this: Congress just dropped bombshell on Trump by introducing legislation specifically designed to block his Greenland invasion plans and Venezuela war escalation. Senate held tie vote on requiring congressional approval for Venezuela operations. 3 Republicans broke ranks to vote against Trump. House members from both parties co-sponsoring bill that would make it illegal to invade Greenland without authorization. This represents fundamental battle over who controls American military power, over whether Constitution's separation of powers still functions, over whether president can act as strongman launching wars unilaterally, or whether Congress has meaningful role. Trump is screaming about this because it threatens his entire approach to foreign policy. His whole strategy depends on unlimited executive authority to make military decisions. These bills say, no, you don't have that authority. You have to work within constitutional framework. You have to get congressional approval. You have to respect that war powers belong to legislative branch, not executive. That's devastating for Trump's strongman image, for his ability to threaten and bluster without consequence, for his plans to reshape geopolitical landscape through force. Whether these bills pass, whether they can be enforced if Trump violates them, whether Congress has will to follow through with consequences, those are open questions. But fact that we're having this fight, that lawmakers from both parties are willing to stand up and draw lines, that votes are this close, tells you something important. Constitutional system still has life. Checks and balances still function if people willing to use them. Next few weeks and months will determine whether American democratic institutions strong enough to contain presidential power, or whether we're entering era of executive dominance that founders would have found terrifying. This is fight over what kind of country America will be, and Congress just fired major shot in that battle. This story continues developing. Stay tuned.